In this video, I'm going to show you a quick way using ZBrush to take your high poly model from reality capture and create a low poly one. This isn't meant to be a full ZBrush tutorial, so I'm not going to go over a lot of how to use ZBrush. And I know that there are some better tools and techniques you could use inside ZBrush to get a slightly better low poly model, but this is just to kind of get you started with this workflow and to get you something pretty quick. So I'm going to first begin by importing in my high poly asset. So I'm going to first close the lightbox. I do like to work in a bigger document, so I am going to just go over here and do a new document so that we have a nice large one. And I do like to change my material over to the flat color before I import, just so I can see it a little bit better. Be careful with these clickings. If you do accidentally start drawing on it, you do have to click Control N to clear it out. Next, I'm going to go and import in that high poly. So I'm going to click Import and locate where that high poly is. We don't need to import in the cameras. We can turn that off, and I'm going to click OK. Once it's loaded in, we should see it over here on the right as a tool. In order to actually get it in our document, we're going to just pick a spot, left mouse, click and hold, and drag to place one in. Be careful you don't accidentally place a bunch in. You only need one. So if you do accidentally place a bunch in, just hit Control N to clear it and do a single click and drag. It doesn't matter where it places it in here. We can always fix where it is later. But once we have it placed, we just have to come over here to edit it. So I'm going to click on Edit. We have our navigation tools over here, so we can rotate around. We can frame it. And this frame is great if you accidentally lose. Like, let's say we accidentally can't find where our object is. If we hit frame, it will bring it back front and center. The other fun thing we can do in ZBrush is click this line fill right here, and it will show us our edges. And we can see that this is an extremely dense mesh, which is great because we want that level of detail on this. But the first thing I'm going to do is I do want to duplicate my high poly. I want to make sure that I keep a nice clean version of that high poly so that I can re-export it later, as well as use it as a base to keep my low poly close to it as possible. So underneath subtools, we see we have Mango RC. I'm going to then click duplicate to duplicate that. And I'm also going to rename that just so I know what it is. I don't like, oops, not that. I pressed the wrong button. Let me undo that. Oops, let's go there. I meant to click on rename. I'm going to call it Mango _ LP for low poly, so I know which one I'm working on. I do want to make sure that I am working on my low poly and not accidentally this one. I did hit the eyeballs, so I should only be looking at my low poly. The first thing we're going to use is underneath geometry. It is called this, where is it? Dynamesh. And what this is going to do is it's going to look at the surface of your model and try to evenly place polys on it. The reason I usually use Dynamesh first is it is good at filling in any kind of holes. If you have really messy geometry, it can also kind of smooth that over. Be aware though, the downside of this is if you don't have an object that is meant to be contained, like let's say you're doing a facade or just a surface, Dynamesh is not going to work on it because it's going to try to close it into a single mesh. So let's just hit Dynamesh right here with what we, at the level that it's at. So I'm going to hit Dynamesh, and we can see that it just kind of smooths out the surface into much more, less polys and more even polys. It did keep the geometry smaller where there is some more detail. So this is really good at keeping detail. But the downside is that it is kind of an ugly mesh. We do get tries involved where needed, and it's not going to look that great when we go to unwrap it in whatever program. But this is definitely a little bit too high. We could try dropping the resolution down lower and re-dynameshing it, and we do that. If you do need to re-dynamesh, it's kind of weird where you have to pick a spot in your viewport where the model is not and hold the control key. Then left mouse click, drag down and release, and it will re-dynamesh it. It didn't drop that resolution down. There we go. And it's like I said, it does a really great job of kind of cleaning it up if there are some weird inconsistencies, but it's not a great looking mesh. If we are looking to make a great looking mesh, we do need to do a second tool to it. So I'm going to turn off Dynamesh. And what we're going to look at is the ZRemesher. This is the one where it will make really beautiful mesh flow, but we're probably going to lose some detail in that. And it's kind of one of those where, if we're trying to go quick, like, is it okay to lose that detail? Or is it something that you could fix over in a modeling program? But let's just kind of use ZRemesher as is. We're going to just maybe keep it at the same just as our first one and just hit ZRemesher and see what we get. So we are at 14,000 right now. So if we hit ZRemesher, we're going to kind of keep it at that level. Hopefully. It's going to take a moment. And there we go. We're about at 12,000 right now. But we can see we have a much cleaner mesh. This would be a lot easier to unwrap and deal with. But we are losing resolution in here. This is one of the reasons why I like to keep this high poly. So I'm going to go back to Subtool and turn on that high poly so we can see both at the same time. So we can see that we are getting Z fighting, but it is starting to lose, it got a little bit soft around here. We can try to do a projection to keep this so that it might pop it back into a closer version of, what it's supposed to be. The way that we do this is we make sure that both are turned on with the eyeball, but we have the low poly selected. We're then going to go right here where it says project, and we're going to click on project all. We technically don't need to project the color information, but there's no reason to not turn it off. And we will say, yes, we're going to do this. And what it does is it's very similar to in Blender, like a shrink wrap, or Maya has a similar tool where it's using the high poly as its base, and it's trying to put the vertices of the low poly as close as it can to the surface of that. So it will get a little bit closer, because this is kind of closer to what we want to see, is that Z fighting. So we hide that high poly again. It's still a little bit on the high end for us, especially if we are trying to make a game object. So I am going to go back to geometry, and I'm going to start to drop this down. So I'm going to take off same. And what we can do is we can give it a target poly count. And this is in thousands. So it's not like 12.73 polygons, it's 12,000 polygons. So that's kind of what it's at right now. It's a little high. Remember too that if we have a specific triangle count that we're trying to hit in a game or for an asset, this is a polygon. So we actually need to basically double this to get the triangle count if you do have like a specific limit. So let's drop this down. Usually I try to go like half of what it was, and I kind of step down gradually. I tend to get better results than just dropping down as fast as possible. So I'm going to set it to 6,000 and hit ZRemesher again. And then, if it's getting a little soft, I could always go back up to the subtool and do that project. then go back and drop it down. 6,000, yeah, it's still a little high for what we're doing. And, you know, usually I like to push it. Like, I like to see how far I can take it. So maybe I'll try like a 2,000. And we did lose this, but this is kind of where we should maybe make a bit of a judgment call of, would it be better to worry about that small detail in ZBrush, or is that something that we could fix later in Blender or Maya? So I would rather take it down further here and try to fix it later versus trying to clean up even more polys. So, you know, it's still kind of high. We're at like 1,000. So we could probably drop this down even further because it's still a little on the high end. So I'm going to go back to ZBrush. I'm going to drop it down to 1. Actually, let's try this. What's 0.5? Let's take it really far and see how far we can go. And we completely lose it. But is that something we could fix later? Maybe. I'm going to actually step back and maybe just go down to 1,000. So that there's at least a little bit right there. There are methods of using ZBrush where you can kind of keep those edges a little bit better. But the purpose of this video is just to kind of get you started with working in ZBrush to create a low poly. So keep that in mind, that this isn't the end all of what we could do with ZBrush, but it's a good start, especially if you haven't worked with ZBrush before. This is a good level. Then you could take this into a modeling package you're more familiar with and get further. So okay, I think I'm pretty satisfied with this. It's just under 1,000. Yeah, we lost the nub, but I would probably clean that up in another program instead anyway. Just go back in and remodel it. So let's practice exporting. I do like to export these one at a time. I do want to export both of them. The reason is that sometimes jumping from program to program, like we went from Reality Capture to ZBrush, then you're either going to go to like Maya or Blender. Its pivot point, its size, its location might get a little bit messed up. So I try to kind of bring things along bring it along for the ride as we go through, just to kind of minimize how much I have to change. So I'm going to make sure Mango LP is selected. I'm going to go up to export. Yeah, I'm going to make sure that this one is hidden. I'm going to make sure this one's selected. I'm going to go to export. And I'm going to export out the low poly first. So remember, we don't want to work in OBJ. We want to stay in FBX. Even though technically we don't need the vertex color on the low poly, I just try to stick with one file type just for consistency. So we're going to stick with FBX. It's already naming it Mango LP for us. So we're going to just save that, and it's going to export for us. That's all fine. Exported. Next, I'm going to re-export out my high poly. Again, we didn't make any changes to it, but it kind of helps make sure that all of the transforms are maintained and the same. So let's select it. We're going to export. Since this one is an export of this, I don't want to overwrite my reality capture one. I'm going to actually rename this to mango_HP for high poly, so that I want to keep this just in case something messes up. Like, I'm kind of always worried about losing files, so I might have, a couple of different versions of it just in case. It saved me in the past. This one will take a little bit longer to write out because it is a much larger file. So the next stage after this would be to import your low poly into a editor of choice. Like I said, Blender, Maya, whatever you want, and you have to unwrap it And you could always make any other tweaks to it, so that then the final stage would be to import it into Substance Painter to create the low poly texture on it from the high poly. That would be covered in another video, not in this video. This one is just to kind of get you started with ZBrush. And there we go. It's exported. And let's make sure we do save. We're going to do a file, save as, and save out our ZBrush project. So I'm going to drop it into Mango. We'll call it Mango ZBrush. And we are good to go. Hopefully you found this helpful. I will say that one of the issues I sometimes run into is when I'm running ZBrush, sometimes it will throw an error and not ZBrush. What I've found to help is to go back up to Dynamesh and re-Dynamesh it, maybe with like a higher or lower resolution, and then ZBrush it again. And it seems to usually fix any issues I have. So I will be putting out another video about what to do with this in Substance Painter. So hopefully you have fun with this.